Mike Tucci, co-founder of Lexington Wealth and CEO. Christine Boccaro and I started this firm back in 2000, 2001. We have a debate. She says 2000, I say 2001. But when we got the firm going, 9/11 happened. We didn't have a lot of clients at the time, but we just had no clue what to do with our clients. We were trying to figure out, the country was going through a travesty. Markets were on a tailspin. What do we do? What do we talk about? Do we talk about markets when previous things like that happened or not? And one of our clients who was a psychologist, she said, guys, money is more than risk and reward and return. It's about people, and it's about emotions, and about people trying to get someplace in life. It isn't all just markets and returns and a whole bunch of Greek letters we can use to measure risk. So at that point, we kind of had a revelation, Lexington did, and we really started trying to focus on the whole client, and really trying to understand what people are trying to do and accomplish in their lives, and what's going on with the children, and with the spouses, and extended families, and a whole bunch of other things. And of course, financial planning comes into it, and of course, investing comes into it, and all of that. Here we are, 20 some odd years later, and what we try to do is try to always think about the emotional side of money and wealth as well as the hard side of money and wealth. And so the event in the spring, we do 2 live in-person events a year, plus a whole bunch of other smaller events. In the spring, we try to celebrate the more emotional side of money and wealth. And in the fall, we attack the more cerebral side of money and wealth. And so this is our spring event. Professor Glenn Frank is going to be our host tonight. A little bit on Professor Glenn. So I call him Uncle Glenn, Uncle Glenn, for a long, long time. Right? We were on some panels back in the day. He was actually briefly a professor of mine in grad school, and he's legendary. He's been in the RIA business, registered investment advisory business, one of the first adopters that go back into the 90s. So he's won all kinds of awards, Worth Magazine, professor at Bentley University, and so on and so forth. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Glenn.
So delighted everyone's here tonight. I have the perfect proposal for tonight that Carrie gave me. So here we go. Let's shun the limitations, expectations, and obligations that we all face for just a few hours tonight, and come together to reflect on how to grow, how to evolve, and how to position ourselves to make the most of what lies ahead. Maybe you are stuck in life's muck and need a hand to pull you out of the muck. Who knows? So regardless of why you're here, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm honored to be next to Dory here. Let me talk about Dory for a few minutes. Very credentialed, extremely experienced, masters, and we've got a PhD, a master's in social work, board certified coach. Incredibly, I'm very jealous of Dory. So she's done this TEDx talk and the bonus years. Check it out on YouTube. So Dory is literally royalty in the encore retirement movement in this country. Her mantra is everything's possible. It's not about retirement. It's about reinvigorate, rejuvenate, rejoice, reinvent yourself. Focus. I mean, if you think about retirement, I think about these chairs. They got 4 legs on the chair. 3 of them are fairly obvious: family, health, money. The 4th leg, and if you don't have all 4 legs, you're going to end up on your keister. The 4th leg is purpose. Very nebulous concept. Dory's going to enlighten us tonight. The doctor is in.
Okay. I'm delighted to be here tonight, and it's a wonderful crowd to get us sort of in the mood for talking about living your best life, because that's really what I want to focus on tonight, living your best life and sort of what's next. So I know you've been, talking, schmoozing, having a lot of food, nice drinks. So I want you to just close your eyes for a minute and just take a deep breath, if you would, in through your nose. Just hold it for a few seconds. And then exhale through your mouth. Take another deep breath. And this time, as you exhale, just silently to yourself, just say relax. Take another deep breath and silently say to yourself, push away all the distracting sounds or thoughts. And just focus on being here, being present, being open to listening, to thinking, to reflecting. And just take one more deep breath. And again, just center yourself. Feel present, feel your inner strength and your inner calm. Great. This is one of my takeaway tips. You know, I'm going to have some tips on living your best life. One of them is breathe. I know we breathe all the time, but we often breathe very shallowly. And I am a real big believer that the fast pace that we're in, it's so helpful to make a practice of like once an hour or at times of transition. Just stop yourself. Your eyes can be open if people are around, or they can be closed. But take a couple of deep breaths. It centers you. It's like pushing the pause button. So I really encourage that. I was trained in the relaxation response, Herb Benson, way, way back. And when I was learning hypnosis, and I just continued it. And, my family has been part, all my clients, every workshop that I do. It's so fundamental, and it's so easy to do that we just need to just slow down a little. Another, self-talk, another thing you can say to yourself is act, don't react. It's so easy to just react to things in this world. So this is one of my big takeaway tips. So I'm giving it to you. So if you want to leave now, you can, but hopefully you'll stay. So tonight we're going to be talking about living your best life at whatever age you are and embracing the bonus years. So the bonus years are the reality now that, similar to like my parents' generation, people are living 20, 30, 40 years past the traditional retirement age of 62 or 65. It used to be that people, were retired, and then within, 6, 7, 10 years, they would die. And the exception back then was when people lived longer. Now, the expectation is that people are going to live longer. The lifespan has shortened a little now with COVID, but not that much, and hopefully it will bounce back. But we have this extended middle age. Middle age now is being thought of as actually 50 to about 75. And it's really important to think about how do you want to live it. The old notion of aging, I'm going to talk about the paradigm shift of aging. The old notion of aging is that in the first stage of life we learn, then the second stage of life we're busy working, achieving, maybe having a family if we're so lucky, if that's what we want, or whatever pursuits that we have. And then you get the top of the ladder, the top of the mountain, when you're 62 or 65. And with the old notion, you are at the top of the mountain, you put on your seatbelt, you grab hold of the throttle, and you just pray for a safe landing. That's changed now. So now, as you can see, I like this to be the bonus years. There's a vast plateau out there of a lot of hills and valleys. It doesn't mean it's all level. There are a lot of ups and downs. But we have a lot of choices to really embrace that period of time as a time to learn, grow, and evolve. So just to kind of summarize a little bit, with this paradigm shift of aging, it is not all downhill. And even the word retirement, it's the word we all know, but it's becoming obsolete. The word actually often is associated with detachment, decline, despair, depression, death, all these D words. But now, as Glenn mentioned before, people are trying to use more of these R words. Like my company, my business is revolutionize retirement, or rewire, or rejuvenate. Some people talk about graduation. It's just important to recognize there are many potentials ahead rather than less. The age 85 is the fastest growing segment of the population, and more people are living into the hundreds. Kids born now have a 50-50 chance of living to be 100. So we really need to think about how to embrace longer life. And what it means is that the retirement, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too, that the whole notion is changing. It's no longer just a destination. It is a journey. It is a transition. And many people love what they're doing. We were just talking about that a little bit earlier. People love what they're doing and they want to keep working. My husband is 90 and he still works a day a week. I'm in my late 70s and I'm still working and I'm not planning to retire for a while. We all age differently though, and work may have a lot of meaning for you. And some people are just totally burned out and they don't want to work. For some people, there may be health issues and you're forced out of working. There have been mergers and downsizing. During the pandemic, many people made choices to leave or were forced to leave and were kind of furloughed and not able to go back. But with living longer, it is important to think about the money part so that we don't outlive our money. And I'll get to that part a little bit longer too. But it's helpful to think about kind of lifespan and life stages. So as I mentioned before, there's that first stage of life, learning, second stage of life. The third stage of life is often thought now of kind of a second adulthood, middle essence, people often say. If you think about it, adolescence is maybe only 100, 150 years old, and it's, people coined it because it was like there's this stage between, childhood and adulthood, and that's adolescence. And so some people say, well, now we have middle essence. So there's this stage between, being the adult and being the older adult. And there are parallels between middle essence and adolescence. Thinking about who am I? What's my identity? If I'm not working anymore or not working in the same way, who do I want to be? If I'm in a relationship, oh my gosh, who are you? We weren't not necessarily the same people now that we were when we first met. And where do I want to live? All parallel questions. Hopefully, though, we have a lot more perspective and wisdom now. And the fourth stage, some people just talk about second half of life, and some talk about a third stage and a fourth stage. And the fourth stage often is life completion or elderhood. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too, but that's the stage when there really is thinking more actively of how do I want to be remembered? What's my legacy? And I think it's helpful to realize, if you think about it, we can be living our legacy every day, just in how we smile at people, how we interact with people, perhaps through our work, perhaps through not working, but just gestures that we have. So let yourself think about that. And COVID-19, I think, has really created more of a sense of reality and urgency for people. Interestingly, the older old in nursing homes, unfortunately, nursing homes ended up being sort of like Petri dishes, almost like cruise ships, where once somebody got sick, more and more people got sick. Separate from that, studies now have been showing that older people actually have handled the pandemic better than younger people, because we're used to ups and downs, and there's more resilience. The people who had the hardest time, I think, are young kids, with not being able to be in school. I know a number of situations where clients' children or grandchildren were born, and the first few years of their life, they didn't really have interactions with people other than their immediate family. And people working and with children at home and homeschooling, a lot of angst and stress. There's actually also what's called the U-shaped curve of happiness. People say that there's happiness more when you're an infant. I mean, in some situations, probably maybe not, but generally, more happiness as an infant. And then when you're older, and in those middle years, particularly 40, 50, often there's so much angst that achieving, the sandwich generation, all of these issues that are at work. But then many, many people say the 70s, 80s, the happiest decades. Not to say there aren't issues. No matter how well we take care of ourselves, our body changes. And ultimately, as far as we all know, we have the same final point in that we will die. I personally think that knowing that there's a finiteness of life makes life even more precious. And I think it's helpful to think about it. I had a near drowning experience when I was in my early 20s, and some strangers saved me. And it was such a pivotal time in my life. It just helped me realize you can't take anything for granted. We want to live every day fully. And that's part of, hopefully, what you're going to take away from this, too, of not taking life for granted and living life as fully as we can, controlling the parts we can so we don't reach the end with regrets. As I said, retirement is a transition now. And I think it's interesting to think about other transitions in your life. So with retirement, there's an ending, there's a period of unknown, or some people call it a messy middle, and there's a new beginning. Some people, as I said before, are forced out of work, are burned out of work, don't want to work in the same way, but want to still earn money. There's no right way anymore for retirement. So it's helpful to think about what are your skills, what are your strengths, how do you want to use it? Do you want to use it in a way of working still, maybe in a more heartfelt situation? Do you want to volunteer? Do you want to be an entrepreneur? The over 50 age group has the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs, and more people in that category are successful often than younger. And again, there's that perspective and wisdom that comes from just years of life experience. Change and transition. Change is the event. And again, I want to provide some frameworks for you to think about as you're thinking about what's next. There's a psychologist from Rhode Island called James Prochaska. He initially started working with people losing weight and quitting smoking, but it's become a well-accepted sort of notion about change, kind of a dialectical model of change. And what's so interesting is he puts action as the fourth step. So many people just get down on ourselves, like, why can't I do whatever it is, X, Y, or Z? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? What's going on? And it's helpful to keep in mind there's a lot that goes before action. Now, these stages I'm going to mention are not linear. Life is not linear, and it's up and down and back and forth. The first stage that he talks about is what's called pre-contemplation. Some of you may be in this pre-contemplation right now, where ideas about what's next are just bubbling in your mind. You're really not even thinking concretely about it yet. And then there's contemplation, where you actually start thinking about it. What are the possibilities? Then there's preparing. Then there's the action. And then there's maintaining the action. And again, it's not linear. It can be back and forth. But if you're wanting to make some change, whatever it is, whether it be about retirement or any aspect of your life, to move or not move, let yourself think about this model. And maybe you need to do more thinking, or maybe you need to do more preparing. I think it's helpful to think about that. And transitions is the process that we go through as we deal with change. And as I said, all transitions have an ending, a period of unknown, and a new beginning. I invite you to just think for a moment about a transition in your life. Going to school, it could have been going to work, getting married, getting divorced, not getting married. You pick the transition and think about, do you have more trouble with the ending, with the middle part, the unknown, or with the new beginning? Just let yourself think about it. And then it's really helpful if you're in a relationship or with relatives or friends, ask them the same question. It will help inform you about how you're going to deal with this stage of life. You might have trouble with one part or the other or a couple of the parts or all of the parts. But it helps you know, because in order to make some change, we do have to let go to make space to open up for something else. I know I have more trouble with the endings and sometimes with the kind of the unknown. But once I get there, I'm just kind of off and running. But we're all different, and there's no right or wrong way. But I think the more we know that about ourselves, the more we can be patient with ourselves rather than impatient with ourselves. There are also a lot of shifts that happen as we get older. I don't necessarily believe that people have to have a midlife crisis, but there are these shifts. I always say there's this nudginess that happens inside. I know for myself, I look in the mirror and it's like I see my mother looking right back at me, like, who is this person here? Or in my relationship, I'll look at my husband or, metaphorically think, who are we? Many people say that if you've been in a long-term relationship, you've gone through many, many different marriages because we change over time. And we also live in a society where there's, blended families, marriages, partnerships, same-sex marriage, heterosexual marriage, partnerships. There's no right or wrong. And, life can be confusing. There's just constantly changing demographics. And, all of these are things we all try to make sense of in this world. In addition, the notion of success begins to change. Just kind of think about it. I don't know that we're ever immune from how other people judge us, but what I find is that as we get older, it's what's called a shift in the locus of control. So rather than giving so much power to how people outside of us view us, there's much more of an internal kind of intuitive sense, like, I know this was good, or I know, what I did or said was okay, even though I'm not getting that feedback that I'd like. And appreciate that about yourself. It can help you feel more empowered, not to feel quite as, needing of that external kind of support. I always like to mention about research. Research says by the time we are 65, it's 30% genetics, which is a big amount if you have a lot of genetic predispositions. But 70% of how we age has to do with lifestyle choices. So taking care of our body and brain, good nutrition, meaningful relationships, spirituality, sense of community, all of these things are things we can control. And attitude is very, very important too. There's a study out of Yale, Becca Levy. In fact, she's written a new book that's excellent called Breaking the Age Code. And she's done a lot of research and studies, and a more positive attitude about aging can actually give you 7.5 more years of life. And the notion is it's shifting from what's called a fixed mindset to a more positive mindset and a growth mindset. So if you sort of accept some of the ageist views in society that it's all downhill, and really actually internalize a dislike of your future self, letting yourself really not like to see older people or to say, oh, I don't want to be that way. I mean, we want to take care of ourselves the best way we can, but there is this internalized ageism where we really are working against our own future self. If we should all be so lucky, we want to live well and think about what quality of life is and to, take as best care as we can. And attitude makes a difference. People can have a positive attitude about themselves and a growth mindset with multiple chronic illnesses and with terminal illnesses. So it's not necessarily the specific situation, but how you try to process and make sense of it. We can't change events in our lives, but we can change the meaning we give to them. We truly can change stories we tell ourselves, and I don't mean kind of making up stories, but we can change our narrative. We don't have to just be the victim to our circumstances. We can learn from, the situations that happen to us. There's a wonderful book that I like to recommend to people called Life is in the Transition by Bruce Feiler. And he really talks about transitions and talks about, again, the same thing I've said and been saying for the last 50 years. We can't change events, but we can change the meaning we give them. Part of what I love in his book, too, is he talks about disruptors in life. You know, and the longer you live, the more disruptors you're going to have had at different points in your life. And there's some that he calls life quakes. And I really like that term. That, you know, if enough disruptors really can feel like an earthquake, a life quake. And how we transition through it can make a difference in terms of transforming ourselves, learning from it, pivots in life, and making the best we can. You know, we all need to still have dreams, but we often need to change them to accommodate for whatever our changing circumstances are. And I think it's helpful. It's like, don't give up your dreams, but just change them in whatever way you have to do it. Just in a simple way, I know in our family, we can't ski anymore because my husband can't do altitude, and we can't do hiking in high altitude, so we still hike and walk, but, you know, lower altitude. There's still things you can do. And so it's important to think that. That's part of that growth mindset. Well-being is a combination of connection, engagement, and purpose and meaning. And in addition, meaningful relationships, a sense of agency that you matter, you know, that people need you, and a sense of community. And if you think about it, work provides that, and active parenting provides that. You know, either at work or being a parent, we have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And we generally have a sense of community, a sense of self-esteem, a sense of purpose, again, sense of engagement, a sense of meaning. If you're not going to work in the same way, whatever you end up deciding to do, it's important to think about how will you build this into your life? What will get you out of bed in the morning if you don't have to get out of bed in the morning for work? What kind of structure? I think we all need a little structure. It doesn't have to be structured like work, but we all need a reason to get out of bed in the morning and a sense of connection and engagement. And not just busy for the sake of busy, because that can feel like just being on a treadmill, but really feeling like what we're doing matters. So again, some tips for kind of living your best life of thinking about these things. So my mantra is grow, learn, and evolve. And you have an opportunity to live your life by design, you know, by trying to figure out what you want to create, or by default. And by default, I mean sort of having this kind of expiration date on your forehead and just kind of waiting to die, you know, or accepting many of the notions and myths about aging and just realizing that, you know, you're not capable. You know, I can't do that anymore. You may have to do it in a different way, but we can still do things. And it's important to recognize it and value it and not let other people define us, not just react to those forces in life, but again, the act, don't just react. I happen to love the late Mary Oliver and her poems, and this is just one little segment from one of her poems, The Summer Day. And just, you know, let yourself think about it. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? The name of the book that I co-authored is called The Couples Retirement Puzzle. And actually the book's not, I mean, it's written for couples, but it's helpful for anybody because puzzle's a noun and a verb. And by the noun, I mean that there are a lot of these different pieces in our life. Glenn mentioned the chair and kind of the four legs of the chair. The 10 must-have conversations that we came up with are puzzle pieces, and I've added a few more since the book came out. But we also have to puzzle it out. That's the verb part. And we have to puzzle it out, think about it for ourselves and with whoever's important in our life. It may be a spouse, it may be a partner, it may be a friend, it may be a relative, but it's important to think about things. And it's important to have important conversations. So often we think, oh, let's put it off till tomorrow. And I'm going to talk a little bit in just a few minutes about some of the conversations, but important again to have it with a partner, a spouse, adult children, grandchildren, relatives, parents if they're still alive. Really important conversations to have. So important things to puzzle out. Finances, they are important, but it's one piece of it. And I love the fact that Lexington Wealth Management is what is called a holistic financial planning firm. It's so important because money is a tool. It can have all kinds of meanings for people, but money is a tool, and it's important to think about how you want to live your life and how you want your money to work for you. And so you're really in good hands, being here, because there are, unfortunately, situations where people only look at the number for the sake of the number and not how you want it to work for you. And I always say to people, no matter how much or how little money you have, it's really important to talk to a financial person and preferably a holistic financial planner. I'm going to mention these others just to kind of keep in mind expectations. What are your expectations for yourself and for each other if you're in a relationship? If you change how you're working, you're both home. I think COVID really stirred up a lot of this for people. You might expect, we're going to do all these things together. And your partner or friend or whomever might think, I don't want to do all those things together. I want to do some of those things together, but not all of them. So it's very important to talk about it because otherwise you really end up just disappointing each other and maybe getting really angry at each other. In the book, there's some vignettes about people, and often it's just clarifying the expectations, but it does mean talking about it. So changing roles and identity. If people are suddenly home more, if you're in a relationship and live with somebody else, the way things had been maybe need to be rethought, and who's going to do what? And, is there the money to be able to hire some people for some of the things that neither one of you want to do? But often important to talk about. It's so easy in relationships to get caught in what are called polar positions, kind of my way versus your way, win versus lose. And those are really pretty counterproductive. So it's better if you're in a relationship, married or not, to kind of open up a space for the we of the relationship and to think win-win. And win-win isn't going to be one for one. Just doesn't work that way. But win-win is sometimes it's my way, sometimes it's your way, and it won't balance out one for one, but if it's too skewed, that's when there's resentment, disappointment, feeling taken for granted. So think about these things. Time together and time apart, that's tied in oftentimes with expectations. There's some things that, one or the other doesn't want to do, but there are other things you want to do together. And it doesn't mean because, you don't want to do what he doesn't want to do or vice versa, shouldn't get in the way of somebody doing something that they really want to do. So again, these are things that could be talked about and compromised about. Sexuality and intimacy. There used to be this Hallmark thing, I don't know if it's still there, but it says happy 60th birthday, and you open it and it's a thing about sex after 60, and you open the card and it's blank. So sex does occur. Parts may change, our bodies change, how we feel about our bodies change. Sex isn't just intercourse. There are many ways of touching, pleasing, being with each other. We all need touch from birth to death. So it's an important area not to shy away from, to think about. And, it's often, many people talk about kind of the detours in life. You may have been in a relationship and suddenly you're single, by divorce or by death. And, the whole dating game, is hard, but important to just, if it's important to you, it's important to continue. And I'm just going to add this caveat because people often, when they don't think about sex for older people, if you are suddenly single or single, you may not think that you need to use protection because you're not going to get pregnant. There are sexually transmitted diseases, and studies say that it's it's rife in the adult population. So, just be safe. Relationships and obligations with family and friends. Again, this can be very clear or it can be complicated. That can be your family, my family, our family, children, no children, grandchildren, no grandchildren. There can be all kinds of things and issues about, do you like my family and are you okay if my mother comes live with us? Or what about your family? I mean, again, or do we want to live close or not close to children or grandchildren? And needing, this is another one of needing to talk about expectations. You might end up deciding to relocate and you end up living closer to children or grandchildren and they expect you to, be the constant babysitter, and you may not want to babysit all the time. You may want to some of the time, but not all the time. These are some of the important conversations. Spirituality, purpose, and meaning. For some people, there's been spirituality throughout life. For some, there can be institutional religion that stays with you. For others, it's not unusual as we get older to open to, again, the what's it all about and to think more about spirituality, feeling like you're a part of, the world and not just, kind of isolated in it. And purpose and meaning is very important. And purpose doesn't have to be the big P of purpose. Purpose can be little P's. It can be, taking cookies to a neighbor that's sick or checking in. A lot of people during COVID, really learned that just a phone call to people made such a difference. So just thinking about that. Health and wellness. I think finances and health and wellness are two of the biggest puzzle pieces in life that impact others. And the longer we live, the greater the likelihood we're either going to be a caregiver or a care receiver. And it's important to just think about trying to take as best care as we can, but the realities are people are living longer, as I said earlier, with chronic diseases and with terminal diseases, and trying to take control of the parts you can. Social life, friends, and community. Even in the very best of relationships, we need other friends. We need friends and we need relationships. Often people say it's easier for women because women, even in a bathroom line, start talking to each other or in a store. And many men, talk about that friendships maybe are more work-based. And, I've had a number of men at workshops that I've done say, I'm terrified. I don't know people outside of work. I don't have an identity outside of work. Start thinking about developing other interests and identities now so you have a sense of what you're retiring to and what you're retiring with. You can take some of these things along with you. And it's good to start now. It doesn't have to be at a point when you retired. I have no idea how many people in the room are working or not working or thinking about it or not, but never too early or too late to think about these things. How and where to live, there's so many more options than there used to be. And it's important to think about it. Staying in a big house, downsizing, moving, where you want to live, being near public transportation. There was been a whole movement of, continuing care retirement communities. And, there's certainly so many benefits of many things. There's now a push for more intergenerational, feeling like we've created more age-segregated parts of society, and that the intergenerational ends up, being something to really think about so older people can help with younger people. It doesn't have to be your own children or grandchildren, but, there can be helping in each other. When my son was born, we had our children late in life. He didn't have any grandparents, and some friends of ours became his grandparents. And it doesn't have to be a biological connection. End-of-life issues, I can't stress this enough. It's so important. People avoid it always. Who wants to think about death and dying? It actually can help you appreciate life, to know it's an act of love and an act of liberation, to take time to get your documents signed, to figure out who's your power of attorney, your proxy, and to really think about how do you define quality of life? What's important to you? What do you want? There's a really nice resource. It's called the Conversation Project. Ellen Goodman, some of you may remember her. She was a columnist in Boston. And when her mother was dying, she started this Conversation Project because she began to realize people just weren't talking about end-of-life issues. And sometimes parents don't want to talk about it with their kids. Sometimes the kids don't want to talk about it with their parents. And there can be resistance on either side, but it's so important to do. And as I said, it's an act of love and liberating. And in addition, we live in a digital world and a non-digital world. Passwords, what your accounts are, keeping the passwords up to date, where the keys are, where the title of cars are. It's very important for people to know that, because at a time of incapacitation or death, it's a crisis anyway, and it's more of a crisis if people have no idea how to access anything, including maybe your Facebook account, if you have one. It's really important to, and again, think about it as an act of love. And it's so freed once you do it. I mean, you have to periodically, just like a financial portfolio, you need to periodically review and make sure it's up to date. But it's really very freeing. And legacy, how do you want to be remembered? Money-wise, but also just, we all want to have kind of thumbprints in the sand. And, how do you want to be remembered? It can be a wonderful time to put pictures together, memoirs. There's something called Storyworth, where you're sent prompts each month, and you can write stories, and it ends up being produced into a book. Lovely ways, have children, grandchildren, neighbors, nieces, nephews interview you. Tell the family story. It's wonderful for, we all will become an ancestor at some point, and it's kind of nice to think about, that the family stories don't get lost when we're not around anymore. So I've sort of mentioned this, I can go on. I mean, the puzzle pieces aren't going to fit together perfectly like a jigsaw puzzle, but I think finances, health, spirituality, and relationships are the most important. There's also a shift that's called sort of a shift from role to soul, from doing to being. Another really great book that I love, it's called The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul by Connie Zweig. It's really interesting to let yourself think about, like, what is spirituality for you? Is it important? What makes you come alive? What gets the juices in you kind of flowing? What makes your soul sing? What rituals are important to you? We have rituals at birth. We have rituals, sometimes religious rituals of confirmations or bar mitzvahs or bat mitzvahs. We have rituals of weddings. There aren't really so many rituals of divorce. There aren't rituals, there's rituals of death, but not, and sometimes there's retirement rituals, but now retirement's changing so much, that those rituals are changing. Think about what rituals would be good for you. I know in my prior life, when I had gotten divorced, it really was important to me to have a divorce party. I mean, it was a hard decision to leave a relationship I knew was just not good for me. And I needed people to celebrate that with me. And I needed to make my own little ritual that, I was re-entering the world and my ex-husband was re-entering the world. And, there's no right or wrong way. When you move, you can have a ritual of saying goodbye to your house. Or if you, close your office or something, you can have a ritual of, saying goodbye to your office. And think about, who do you want to be there, if anybody, and how do you want to celebrate it? It's very helpful to think about it. And I can't stress enough the idea of gratitude for our life, forgiveness, forgiving ourselves and others. Nobody's perfect, and I always say forgiveness is not forgetting. So there may be things that are really difficult, but you still can forgive and recognize we're all human. And some things are hard to forgive. But sometimes it does help to think that forgiveness is not forgetting and it's not condoning. And again, the legacy. So, my question to you is, how will you build connection, engagement, and purpose and meaning in your life, individually as well as with others? So just a few examples here. You can have your own, but it could be bicycle riding, nature, walking outside, dancing, playing golf, playing an instrument, going to an open mic evening, just sitting by yourself, reflecting, being with friends, engaging activities. Again, put your own picture up there, but, it can be pottery or any kind of craft or just talking with people, being part of a group, playing an instrument, tai chi, gardening, no right or wrong way. There may be things that you just haven't had time for and that maybe were put on the back burner, and when all these other demands of life came, upon you. Resurrect them, pull them out. Or if you don't have any things that you remember interest you, think about people you admire. What are some of the things they do? What are some things you'd like to learn? And meaningful activities. It can be reading, it can be mentoring, it can be lifelong learning. I'm a big proponent of lifelong learning, or sometimes people now say learning lifelong. Traveling. I know traveling, during COVID, became so much more complicated. People are starting to travel again. And there are groups of seniors, older people, elders joining together around causes. There's a conscious elder network, all different kinds of political persuasions, causes. There's probably something somewhere that you might want to join with and have a sense of giving back. So think about creating your individual vision, and if you're in a relationship, it's really helpful if you can think about it and have your partner or spouse think about it, or if you know that, a relative, a sister, a brother, a friend's going to be part of this next part of your journey, have them do it too. So again, a few things to think about. What values or principles have been most important to you in your life? What are your guiding beliefs about life? What life lessons have had the greatest impact on you? How have you made a difference in the lives of others? What's important for children, grandchildren, or others to know about your life? How do you want to be remembered? And other questions to kind of puzzle out with yourself or whoever's important in your life. What have you always wanted to do but haven't done? What are your biggest goals and dreams? If you had unlimited money, what would you want to do alone or together with a partner, spouse, friend? What new things would you still like to learn? What do you most want to see or experience? What relationships, if any, do you want to repair? Where do you want to live? How can you live your life with a greater sense of purpose and meaning? And this last question I really love. It's part of George Kinder, who's a financial life planner. He has 3 questions, and I've modified the last one a time. If you went to the doctor and you were told you only had 24 or 48 hours to live, what would you regret not having done or said? Edit the said, because I think conversations are so important. So let yourself think about that, and because it's very important, and you don't have to wait until, and we don't know when our end is going to be. Start at whatever age you are now. What do you want to potentially repair? So I urge you to just think about, where are there sort of some undone things that you'd like to have to put some more closure on. And a few more reflections. What are 10 things that make you happy? Kind of 10 peak experiences. Who was there? What was it? What made it special? Helpful to think about, because it might help inform you of some things that you'd still like to do ahead. As you reflect on your past, what are 3 to 5 things you're most proud of, and why? Sometimes we tend to magnify the negatives and don't always think about the positives, so think about. As you think about what's next, what are 5 losses, things that you would miss, that you might need to give up to make space to do something else? It might be related to work, It might be related to where you live. It might be changes because of what you can or can't do now. But let yourself think about the losses. And, people don't always recognize that with retirement, as well as other transitions, there really can be some grief. People often think, well, you're retired, you shouldn't be sad, you should be happy. But there often there's losses and changes and grief. And it's important, and often it's called a kind of ambiguous loss, a not sort of understood loss, but it's still a loss. And it's important to just recognize that. And what are 5 gains? What are 5 things you're looking forward to at this next stage of life that you never had time for? When you talk, have a blast. And this is an acronym that we developed for our book. The B is blaming gets in the way. And this is for any kind of conversation, not just, about what's next, but as best you can, use what are called I statements. I'm thinking about, I'm feeling. Try to avoid you statements. You make me, you didn't do. Even if it's not intended, you statements can be blaming and shaming. And if we feel blamed and shamed, we get defensive, we react. So it can just help in conversations at work, at home. Blaming gets in the way. Listen without interrupting. None of us are born good listeners. It is a skill. And many professions, train you more than others. But it's really easy, particularly if you've been in a long-term relationship, it's easy. You hear the first couple of words, you think, oh, I know where this is going. And you're already thinking of your brilliant response. Might be right, but it might be wrong. So it's very helpful to listen. And there's a little technique called mirroring where before you respond, you actually say, this is what I heard you say. Not interpreting it, but these are the words I heard you say. Is that accurate? It's really nice to be listened to. And it really is nice to be able to say, yeah, you got the first part, but you didn't hear the second part. Or, you did hear it all. Thank you. Or you got the second part, but you already had forgotten the first part. It's a helpful technique. Active listening, eye contact with people, particularly as we get older, and if hearing, ends up being a little bit of a problem, it really helps to, talk directly to each other. And the A is a number of things. Agree to disagree. You're not going to agree on everything. Don't make assumptions, and appreciate what you hear. And then the S and T go together. Set a safe space to talk, and talk without distractions, and set a time limit. If you're not used to talking, say, I would like to talk about whatever, moving, whatever, for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. The beauty is you can come back to it. And turn off the television, the computers, so that you really can focus in on each other. And just a few tips to create the shared vision. Just be open and curious, as you're comparing the lists of each other. Ask questions if any parts of it aren't clear. Take time to question anything. Share something positive you learned. Again, appreciate what you're hearing, even if you don't agree. Make a list of things you agree on and things you don't agree on, and set up a time for another conversation. Vital aging is a lifelong process of achieving potential, creating meaning, and enriching life through contributions and connections in community. I really like this definition. Some people talk about conscious aging, positive aging. We all age differently, and aging can be very hard. But it's trying to be connected, engaged, with a sense of purpose and meaning throughout. And just kind of pulling it all together now. We can't control everything. Control the parts of life that you can. Live your life fully, so hopefully you don't reach the end with regrets or reach the end without regrets. Make friends with people of all ages. Share your stories. I'm a big proponent of intergenerational connections. It's so important. Harvest your wisdom, live your legacy. There are many different ways of harvesting your wisdom, but you can take a piece of paper and make a line in the middle and start with the year of your birth and divide it in decades and put it to 100 and put down what were the events that happened, like in the first decade, second decade. What were the people that were important? What are the things that you did? It's very helpful in the life review and life reflection to really look at your experiences and to appreciate it. A lot of people like to say, like I have 77 years of life experience rather than I'm 77 years old. And if you can, kind of get yourself open to the idea that it's the life experiences we have, you can harvest your wisdom. Forgive yourself and others, be mindful, be grateful, just notice. Nature is so beautiful. Take time, notice, slow yourself down, breathe. Design versus default, you have a choice. Be intentional. The more that you can notice, be mindful, be conscious, try to be intentional. And just think about how you want to act, what you want to do, rather than just reacting to everything around you. And I'm going to end with a poem that I love. It's by Rilke, who a German poet, and it's from his Letters to a Young Poet. And you can just close your eyes for a minute, and I'm going to read it to you. I happen to love questions, so be patient toward all that is unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms or books that are written in a foreign tongue. The point is to live everything. Live the questions now, and perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live your way some distant day into the answers. It's hard to answer that because it really, it's so individual for people. But if I hear the question right, sort of asking me, what's the more difficult stages? People often talk about there can be initially a honeymoon stage, where people are just, again, it depends on how you're retiring. If you're just not working anymore, or maybe still working but a different way, but you feel like, you're more in control of your time, there may initially be a honeymoon phase. What I find is after the first, it can be for some people the first couple of months or a couple of years, if you haven't built the connection, engagement, and purpose and meaning for yourself in your life, often that's when I may see people. Some people want to plan ahead. Other times I see people saying something's missing. I don't know what it is. And it may be, kind of knowing that you've isolated too much, or depressed, or drinking more than you should, or drugs. I mean, there's a high incidence of that, when people are feeling disconnected. So that can be a difficult time. Many people are able to find a rhythm that works individually and in a relationship. But again, life isn't linear. And so something that may seem to have worked for a while, you may have to rethink it because there could be some health changes of yourself or someone that you love. And so you may have to kind of readapt. So it's hard to answer the question. There is another good book. I happen to like books. So Ken Dykewald wrote a book about what retirees want. And he has done a lot of research and really does talk about some of the different stages. And he actually breaks it down into different types of people and, kind of the type of person you were during your working life and some of what people then need at the next stage of life. That could be a whole other separate talk, just kind of focusing on that book. But, he talks about, and he breaks it down in terms of how people use the retirement years. Some people feel really compelled to want to keep working or want to give back. Others are so burned out they want nothing to do with that. I think he has 4 different groups of different kind of retirees. Same kind of thing. He has 4 different groups of people, who either do exercise or don't exercise, and it sort of depends on, how you've done it before. There's studies that if you haven't been doing volunteer work, there's less likelihood for many people. Many people say, I want to do volunteer work, but they don't. If you start doing it and can take it with you, there's more of a likelihood. Some people will start something new in retirement. It just, it really truly does depend. on the person. But that's another really good book that I recommend to people.
Yeah, people really need to think through how their time's going to work. They get the gold watch on a Monday, and so what are you going to do at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock the next day? And they don't really think it through. They're not worried about it. I'll learn to play the piano, whatever, golf more, garden or whatever. And the reality kicks in that there's really no meaning, no fulfillment. Bottom line, if you're not helping other people, you're not going to be happy. Maybe it's covering the grandkids, maybe it's joining the Peace Corps, whatever it might be. Continue to take care of your clients, et cetera, et cetera. But somehow, some way, if you're not helping other people when your head hits the pillow at night, you're not going to be feeling too good. So somehow you got to plan that through. I've got one of my buddies climb the financial mountain, never listened to a bit about what are you going to do next. I was telling somebody in the audience here earlier, I mean, you can only clean the garage so many times, hit so many golf balls straight. So you really got to kind of think it through. And to Dory's point, if it's something you were doing in advance, kind of get used to it, got acclimated a little bit, try some things out. But it's such a dramatic shift, and then your identity. One day you got 50 people working for you, another day your grandchildren don't listen to you. So you gotta really think it through. And again, really plan through your time as much as you might plan through your money.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, there is no right way. I mean, there are a few industries now that have a mandatory retirement age, but many don't. But even with that, many people have what is now called a phased retirement, which is what you're talking about, where you negotiate and say, I want to still work. These are the things I want to do, but I want to work 4 days a week, or I want to work certain hours. And depending on your position, some positions allow you to do that, and some don't, unfortunately. I mean, part of why I love the work I do is I consider it sort of a portfolio career, that I do a little of this and a little of that. I see people in therapy, I have coaching, I've done teaching, I do writing, I have a monthly webinar, I do workshops, a little of this and that, and I can cut back or whatever, based on what I want. It's really nice if you can think about, what I encourage people to do is write down all your skills, way back to whatever even jobs you had when you were young. What are the skills? What are the ones you like? What are the ones you do well? What are the ones you want to transfer? What are the ones you do well but you don't want to do anymore? Or think about the job you're doing now and think about, what would my ideal job be, with wanting to phase out? I've worked with people in a number of different professions, really set up, some people have said, I don't want to do client-facing work, but I want to do, this other kind of thing, whether you're a lawyer or, physicians sometimes can change their positions, different opportunities for people in the financial industry, but absolutely phased retirement, many people do. And I think that, COVID has also opened up this whole thing about remote versus in-person work. And I think that's going to be changing, some of what's going to be possible in terms of the phasing out of retirement. But it doesn't have to be cold turkey. If you have that choice. I mean, some people don't have that choice. But.
Sometimes you kill two birds with one stone. Say the 55-year-old has a certain number they have to hit by the time they're 65 to retire. And then guess what? After 65, they have no idea what they want to do. And the two birds with one stone can be that, gee, I really don't like my job right now. Here's this job over here. And the mission of that company really resonates with who I am and what I want to be. And yes, I get paid less, and I may have to work a few more years, but it's a double benefit because you're going to be happy from 55 well beyond 65, and you may not want to leave at 65 and keep going. So again, it's kind of run some numbers. There's some fields like Dory's mentioning where it's an all or nothing profession. Some places are transitional. But again, why be miserable for those years and trying to hit this number? maybe seriously think about working longer at a place, again, where their mission resonates with your own.
And the other thing to think about is, you may not want full-time work. It may not be possible in your particular industry, but your skills may be very helpful in another field and in a part-time capacity. There are a lot of people who specialize in helping people kind of over 50 find other jobs. And Carrie Hannon, Hannon, she happens to specialize in helping people find work 50 and over. She's a journalist. And I've interviewed her a couple of times in my program, and she has a great website with resources of part-time work. Because again, the issue is if we're going to live longer, some people, are scared about, what does it mean if I'm not bringing any money in? And some people, really do need to work in a different way, particularly if there have been health changes. I mean, that's the other part that's difficult. But it's control the part you can, and there's no right way to retire anymore.
There's a tremendous number of resources out there.
Right.
Just a tremendous number. I back in my book, if you picked one up, Dory's got tons of stuff on her website. Listen to her 100-odd podcasts. You can find Carrie Hannon, et cetera. So there's tons and tons of organizations out there looking to help folks.
I am a firm believer that 70 is not the new 50 and 80 is not the new whatever. It is the age that it is. And, I think that's part of the ageism of, people still wanting to hold on to youth, of saying, well, 70 is the new 50. And people do say at the later stages of life, that there are shifts that happen at 75, at 80, at 85, at 90. There's a different sense of time because of the urgency of knowledge of time left. But some people truly do age very, very well, and some people don't. And it's a matter of trying the best you can to age as well as you can. But I agree, 86 is not 60.
Okay, I can paraphrase here. Basically, changing roles are huge. One day you're a parent, they're at home, they're under your wings or whatever. Next day it all changes, relationships change. At one point you were the mentor, at another point they're giving you advice and you're not taking it. And so changing roles is huge, and that was a slide that really stuck with Angela, is to her personally. Did I do that justice, Angela?
And it's an example of the disenfranchised grief that I was mentioning, that we don't always recognize it, but there is some grieving involved in that. And then needing to think about, I can't bring it all back, but what are some ways I can build into my life some connections and engagement, and maybe even reach out to some of the people. I mean, sometimes, I see it as the silver lining that happened during COVID. I don't know if some of you had the experience, but I know, way back in March of 2020, I now meet monthly with cousins that live all over, and I have reconnected with college roommates. And, my husband, who's 90, still, is connected, and we have monthly contacts with his roommates, some of the ones that he was friendly with that are still alive. So there may be ways, if there's some people either through work or the act of parenting, to just see how, reach out, see if they're involved, because it's true, the community ends, or the connection, where it's easy to see people ends, and it may take some effort. But it's important to see if there's a way of building, some important relationships back into your life, and to try to figure out what are you interested in, what gives you a sense of purpose and meaning. Might there be a way, to connect in a new community? Whether it could be a faith-based community, it could be a political thing, it could be meetup groups. If there's something you like doing, taking a class. I'm a real advocate of, I don't know how many of you know about these lifelong learning programs that are around, but there are many that are called Osher lifelong learnings, because the initial funding was from Bernie Osher. Although I think that they're not being funded anymore, but there's some separate. So around here, there's Brandeis, Ollie program. Ollie is Osher Lifelong Learning. Tufts has a lifelong learning program. Regis College, it's not an Osher one, but Regis College has one. UMass Boston has one. And most communities, I don't know about Lexington, I don't know here, but most communities, I know in Brookline where I live, the adult education have programs, and their senior
Lexington's
centers.
very robust.
And Lexington's, I would
tremendous.
imagine that it would be.
Council have councils on aging.
And councils on aging. And all of them are really good. And I truly do recommend it. And lifelong learning, any of these lifelong learning programs are wonderful because you can connect with the community. They have lunch and learn, just like I know you have lunch and learn kind of programs here. But through these, they have lunch and learn programs. You can take a class. I've taken some at Tufts. And I haven't since COVID started, but they're hybrid models now, I think. But that's a way, that's the importance of building friends and community and new connections. And sometimes it is totally starting over, you're right. Yeah, we started pickleball last summer, and we also ride e-bikes, which are fabulous, the e-assist bikes. And as my husband says, he wouldn't be able to ride at all if we didn't have these e-assist bikes. We can go for 25, 30-mile rides. You do too? Okay, yeah. I mean, there are many things, and there can be meetup groups then of, and sometimes you might be the one organizing it to get some other people, to do things. But I agree with what Glenn said too. Pickleball's fun. And I mean, the socialization, the round robin part of it, it's really fun.
Anyway.
And I wanted to mention too, Glenn had said it was okay to mention of my...
Go for it.
A couple of things. One, on the fourth, I did sort of say it, but on the fourth Tuesday of each month, except December, I have, I call it Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Experts. Bruce Feiler, the one who wrote Life is in the Transition, he has a book, it's actually this coming Tuesday, it's called The Search, about looking for work after 50. But if you go to my website, revolutionizeretirement.com, it's a free call open to professionals and the public. If you sign up, it's noon Tuesday Eastern Time. If you sign up and can't be there, or even if you are there, you get a recording link after the call. And there's a podcast series, I'm into my 11th year now, and at the 10-year mark, I started re-releasing the earlier podcasts or interviews as podcasts. So they're all available and free also. So you can get them through my website. Sign up always starts the week before at revolutionizeretirement.com. And also, if any of you are interested, I've been sort of learning some new kind of experiential ways of working with people. I love positive psychology, so using strengths and using art-based programs. And I'm starting to do some workshops. They're not listed yet on my website, but if any of you are interested, I'm going to do some for individuals and some workshops for couples. And if any of you are interested, let me know, because it's in the offing, although, and someone, there's a certain game called Turning Point. It's about using your strengths, and she's from Israel, and she's going to be in town in July, so this is motivating me to think about maybe, getting, at least one of the workshops, during the week in July when she's here. So if any of you are interested in that, let me know.
Thank you both for everything. What I always think about when we have speakers come in, are there any actionable ideas? So I actually heard quite a few actionable ideas for us all, because at some point in life we're all going to hopefully get there and move on to the next stage of life. So I think thinking about things and maybe doing some homework and research and letting it settle for a bit is helpful. So thank you both very, very much. We're going to have some coffee, some pastry, and a little more wine if you want some.